All right, so the topic that I investigated was the future of farming. And the way that this idea came to be was actually when I was talking about what the future of what our system of food might have to deal with later down the line. So for example, a lot of people like to think of the future of farming as a more of an economical perspective. But what if we stopped eating food altogether and everything was done through different sources of energy? So I started to think about how farming might be affected later down the future. So this is just a rhetorical question, but food is a very big portion of our lives. It has to deal with our culture, it has to deal with the way that we attain energy. And just here, just for the fun of it, I decided to add a picture of a taco. Here you can see that I also added the ingredients for the recipe. So you guys can see that farming creates a lot of these ingredients. So you wouldn't be able to create a lot of cultural items without farming. So I decided to give you guys in some background information. So the first farm was documented around 10,000 BC, and it was in a place called Fertile Crescent. Generally what happens here was hunters and gatherers realized that the land was very fertile and they were able to gather grains. And not only that, but they were also able to plant grains and get food back. This was a huge concept that was born as hunters and gatherers were able to establish shelters and they were able to establish permanent settlements, right? So this was an important revolutionary cause that changed the way that we see our world today. For example, cities wouldn't be able to exist if we didn't have houses to live or places where we could call our home. So here I have the timeline of early farming, and this will tie in to how we have various steps. So when I'm talking about the future of farming, I'm talking about it down the line past 2045. I'm talking about once farming has crossed the singularity. So as any singularity goes, there must be a small increase where we change our ways in the way that we can farm. For example, we can see that in 10,000 we were just farming grains, and then down the line to 27 BC we're now doing corn. So we can see that there's a small increase in what we farm. So this brings in the idea of Moore's law and the singularity and how this might tie into farming by itself. So just as some quick references, we already know what it is, but Moore's law was invented by a man with the last name of Moore. Sorry, I forgot his first name. And the way it worked is he saw how the technology we had now was increasing every 2 years. And it was very slight, but it was happening. And so he was able to come up with the idea that later down the line we'll reach a specific point where we'll be surpassing the technology we have now by immense amounts. So this brings in the idea of the singularity. Physics-wise, this is the idea of when you cross a black hole and everything past that is just entirely new. We have no idea where to go from there. So how this ties in is the concept of Moore's law and the singularity formed together, the technological singularity as I have shown right here. The way it works is we will increase exponentially, very rapidly, in the way that we create technology, but there will be a certain inflection point where everything that we know right now will completely cease to be past imaginary bounds. For example, any biological human being will be surpassed by anybody who is biologically enhanced or even machines, which is why it's very important. How does this tie into farming? So as you can see, farming is not a concept where you have old tools and whatever. Farming also develops. And the technology of farming has also increased by immense amounts. Back before the 19th century, we didn't see anything such as tractors because electricity was not even invented to be able to create these types of tools. So back then we used horse-drawn carriages and we used hoes, we used shovels. And now we're using machines where we are able to completely change the efficiency of how we create these tasks and how we do them. So here in this chart, I bring in the idea of what needs to be said. So this is the elephant in the room. Does technology have to necessarily be just completely revolutionary? Does everyone has to use it to understand it, or how does it work? So here I brought a chart. This was used by a Nebraskan farm. And basically how it went is, back in Nebraska, a lot of farms existed. And as you can see from here, they created this huge chart that demonstrated the different technological innovations. In this situation, I'm talking about cars, I'm talking about trucks, I'm talking about tractors that were used as time went by. As you can see, before the 19th century, there was nothing. But once we started reaching certain milestones, like for example, cars began to be developed, tractors began to be developed, all of these technologies began to rise in terms of who's using them. However, we've seen that from the 19th century to what the date says here, 2005, or even later today, that we haven't reached a singularity where anything has been revolutionized in terms of farming. So this brings a question. Does the singularity have to be a revolutionary technology where we can't even comprehend it anymore, or does everyone have to use it? So I'm about to go into that. So the first technology that was that is first beginning to be used is drones with farms. So we already know about drones. We've already seen them. We know that they're being used in households. We know that they're used militarily. We know that we can harness their power of surveillance. And with that, drones in farming have been developing new technology. And the technology is called, it's called advanced imagery. The way this works is they were able to change the software of just regular drones, add different machinery, and were able to make complete scans of the land. This would revolutionize the way in which workers view the fields. Rather than doing physical inspections, they can see the soil and the land from an iceberg point of view. And so from here, a company called ActGo, which is that the goal is to create new revolutionary technology for farms, more specifically, has created this. So this is an image explaining how the different types of farms might show crops or weeds. So for the time being, it is not completely used right now. So this indicates that there's some limitations. So the first one is the hardware versus software, which could limit whether we're going to be progressing bit by bit or whether it's going to be completely exponential. So what I mean by that is, if you look at your phones, you will see that maybe the iPhone and the Android phones change bit by bit. And it's always a small improvement that tries to reach somewhere else. And that's what they're talking about here. By hardware, they mean that they're changing the drones to being more durable. They're long lasting. But however, AgGo is trying to revolutionize by going into software. So the problem here, the limitation, is hardware versus software, because we don't know whether we should be improving little by little and then reach an inflection point, or completely try to revolutionize the game like tractors did and maybe reach a different point. Another limitation is that farmers will encounter large data entries. And this is a problem for farmers that have not dealt with numbers, because this is an issue that could change the way that they make decisions. Since no logarithms or artificial intelligence have been developed in this field, because it's brand new, we can see that large data entries could pose a problem in whether we're going to be adapting these new technologies later down the line. In terms of analytics, such as the advanced imaging, we see that the radio frequency identification and other types of sensors have also been implemented. The way this is relevant to us now is, currently we know that chips could be used of tracking, but as of now, they've been trying to develop a sensor that's able to completely implement the tracking chip idea, where you can, tag different types of crops and livestock, and instead use them to track the vitals, track nitrogen levels, and track different types of water consumption. This would allow farmers to be able to completely optimize the way they work. So this brings in different ideas, such as genetic engineering. So we see that we can use imaging to optimize the way that we can farm. However, what if we optimize it a different way? So as it says here, the process of genetic engineering has been reaching multiple areas. So this right here is called the mini chromosome project. So what we know from right now is that currently farms are using geneticists and suppliers for farms alike have been trying to transform crops to being more durable, to dealing with higher yields, being far more productive for farmers. However, we've been trying to reach different levels with this project, as this project right here has to do with not only adding like 5 or 6 different traits, but instead hundreds and thousands of different traits into a single type of corn species or other type of crop for the other matter. So why is this relevant to us now? There are limitations and why it deals with the future of the singularity. If we continue down the line of continually looking at our crops and optimizing them and then changing their genetic makeup, does that mean that the new food might be readily available? It might be good to eat, but is it safe? That's a problem that we'll have to deal with down the line when it comes to the singularity, as we have no idea what the possible consequence could be. Secondly, the second problem is, will food be genuine down the line? Ray Kurzweil, in his book, he predicts different types of events that will happen down the singularity. For example, down 2045, we already know that the singularity would exist. AI will surpass human beings. But he also mentions that in 2049, there will be a complete override in the way we see crops. He says that nanotechnology and just nanotech alike will change crop forever because it will change their makeups and everything will be artificially done. Not only that, but we will see that we will see problems with that. So this brings into the idea of vertical farms. We've been seeing a lot of downsides to what the future might be like. However, there's also some positive outlooks. Vertical farms have recently been developed. They're recently working on, as you can see from the images, the way they work is they stack different types of crops together and they try to use them to make them more efficient. So far we've been seeing that they're trying to make them more efficient by changing them genetically, but instead of trying to do that, they're changing external points of view. So this would indicate that the environment could also play a huge role. Vertical farms are very prominent today because the way they work is it's a sunny day every day. And this would increase yields and reduce water consumption and any other resource consumption without the actual problem of damaging the environment, which is something that's very problematic down the line. So this is the actual big topic, the big key idea of the singularity. Once AI come in, once robotics and everything take over, once genetic enhancements are a thing for human beings, what will happen to farms? Will farms be completely erased? Will farms be automated? Will farms be, just completely changed overall? We see, this is my topic. I decided to think about what would happen if they were completely automated. So here I named 3 projects that have been working to create this. So the first one is the Hands-Free Hectare project. The way it worked is a university worked together with roboticists to try to change the hardware and the software of different machines. For example, they used an old tractor that could manage by itself. They used drones that could manage by themselves, and they'd be able to farm an entire land by itself. And what they realized is by the end of an entire farm growing season, they were able to create around 200,000 pounds money-wise of net worth, which is around 4.5 tons of barley, I believe. That's what the sources say. And this proved that farms can work without the need of human involvement. Blue River Technology also did the same idea, but instead of using just automated machines, they're creating drones that could initiate the different types of ways that humans should move together. And then lastly, the Kyoto project is very important because currently it's been used in Japanese farms, as there's a huge vegetable farm in Kyoto. And the way it worked is AI alone, machines alone, without any human involvement, have been growing vegetables such as lettuce. And they have been creating a huge risk for humans. How? Sorry, this is just an image. This is the tractor that was changed to Kyoto. Sorry, the Japanese tractor for the Hands-Free project. And then this one right here is the robo-lettuce. Basically what happens is how they call it. It's basically the Kyoto farms in Japan that used vertical farming, as I mentioned before, to be able to create the yield necessary. So what are the ethical concerns? If we do reach a singularity where humans are no longer necessary and we are replaced, does that mean that we are no longer useful? So as we see from the RoboLettuce example in the hands-free project, we see that there are going to be times where humans will no longer be useful. They're no longer going to be relevant in terms of the workplace. The Kyoto project, where the vegetable farms were being grown, showed that they reduced 50% worth of labor costs. So this seems like a very important idea economically, but we don't know if ethically is the right choice. So what was the big idea of all this? Once 2045 is being reached, we're going to be reaching points where technology is no longer going to meet the bounds that we have right now. Once we cross the singularity, the current values that we hold and the current culture that we have might not even be held as normal anymore. So where will farming be down 2045? As I mentioned, Ray Kurzweil gave a hypothesis that we'll be using nanotechnology instead of using regular farms. If this was the case, what happens to the values that we have now? So I decided to look into the different types of cultures, as I mentioned before, when I showed you that recipe, which culturally enough, it was one of the big aspects. The food that we grow is a big aspect of what we see in our culture today. For example, you can visit a new country without thinking about the different foods that you might think of, that you might eat there. So if farming were to disappear, what would happen to our cultures down the line? And this is a big idea that needs to be thought of. So in conclusion, farms are reaching a point where they don't need humans anymore. They're reaching a point where the crops that we eat are not entirely the same as you ate last time. You can see that the food that you've eaten from 3 weeks ago is probably changed in some way, shape, or form because they've added something to it. And while this is just a small, minimal change, you can see that down the line, these small increases, as you see from the technological singularity, might just reach an inflection point where it's not even the same food anymore, and we're not even growing things on farms anymore. So with that in mind, I'll just say thank you. That's generally my topic and where it goes.
So any questions? Must be something, yeah.
So you spoke in large part about traditional farms and agricultural stands. So I have a few questions. So you spoke about how human, intervention is going to decrease in farming over the next few decades. However, there's been a recent push for laboratory grown, for example, meats that contain no meat and contain proteins that are cultured. Do you think that sector as well is going to become, automated, or do you think human involvement is still going to be needed in those sectors of high scientific research?
Based on what I've read, I noticed that farms themselves have been being automated, and that's the goal that they're pushing for right now. But what they're trying to do now is, if they're going to be automating something, this means that while humans will not work as farmers anymore, there will be an entire skill shift. By that, what I mean is there will be a point where farmers will no longer be working on farms. This would tie in with your question, and they're not going to be working on farms anymore. They're going to have to do something entirely different. Maybe they'll have to become engineers and have to adapt different types of technological advancements and ideas into their work rather than just how the seasons change and how the sea could work. So I don't think, this is based on speculation down the line, I don't think that we will be using machines as the way that we're going to be setting standards for what's best for the time being, because we have control over that for now. But maybe 1,000 years from now, there's the possibility that AI, once AI becomes better than human beings, we can automate these laboratories. So while there's a big push for that, there's the chance that we will replace them in there as well.
So is there a way of life on farms, and is that something separate from everything you've talked about that we should try to preserve or create historical archives of what living on farms used to be like?
Yeah, let's see. So historically, we do see that farms did become pretty big because of the idea of the Fertile Crescent, right? Where the first farm began. And we see that it created a big part of our culture, right? We have the idea of like settlements, we have the idea of our homes because of farms. And while that might not be the only factor that deals with it, it is a big aspect. So yes, I understand there is a big idea with farmland by itself. If farms were to disappear, however, I think that the ideas, the concepts, the values that were created from farms would carry on. Unless, I don't know, again, based on speculation, maybe down the line, maybe we don't even need homes anymore. Maybe we can just plug ourselves in to a machine and just completely transfer ourselves rather than just use homes as our actual base or shelter. So that would be another interesting way of looking at it. I did come across a couple of papers that were looking into projects of trying to reduce automated farming and instead looking at different ways of preserving the environment. And this is how I found out about vertical farming. The way it worked is if you use vertical farms, you are reducing the amount of land used and you are reducing the amount of like resources used. So yes, there's a possibility that farms might just completely be erased entirely because of these greenhouses that are just using vertical farms. In terms of the archives that might occur, I mean, we already have archives about how farms were millions of years ago, not millions of years, but hundreds of years ago. But yeah, in terms of how this might affect us down the line, down to the singularity, it's always based on speculation of how we change as human beings instead of how farms change entirely. So I hope that answers that.
Yes.
So did you come across any studies that compared, like let's say farming technology exponentially improves, but it doesn't completely replace humans? So you have that compared to farming technology completely replacing humans. Is there like a comparison, like which one is better?
Yes. So I forgot to mention this in the presentation. So what happens is when they invented vertical farms, we saw that in the Kyoto project, they were using vertical farms to reduce the cost. And they also used AI to reduce labor costs. And what they noticed is that the amount produced compared to a traditional conventional farm was, I think, approximately like over 300 times what it would have been if it had just been done on a regular plot of land. I believe that's the number, I'm not too sure. 3 times 325 times more than the actual crop of a regular farm. And I think this has to do mostly with the technology used. I think one way to look at it would be farmers do understand what the right choices would be, but at the same time, they're also thinking about things economically, where the machine is just thinking how to make everything better. I did also forget to mention, which is kind of bad, that they're currently working on technology that's meant to scan. It's very aptly named See and Spray system, where they're going to use AI to identify crops and weeds alike, and they're going to spray them accordingly. For example, crops are going to be fertilized, whereas weeds are going to be applied with herbicide. And this would tie into the idea, because the way it works is if you are spraying down the wrong things, like for example the herbicides, due to a humongous wave of herbicides over the entire set of crops, you are reducing your yield. Whereas if the machines are doing it, you are just reducing the error. But I think it was like 90% of all things used will be just erased. For example, 90% of all the herbicides we use now will just not be used anymore, because the machines are able to completely identify and eradicate the herbicide. So yes, there is a huge increase in the farms because machines are able to just think a little better in terms of just farming itself. Hi.
So you said that automated farms are a smart economic choice for farmers.
Yes.
But what will happen to the economy when you put this huge farming industry, all those people out of work?
That's why it's an ethical concern. When it comes to ethics and down the line where it could be, we don't know where it might take us, right? So it's, again, all of it is based on speculation, because I haven't lived in 2045 or anything like that. But this is a big ethical concern, because what happens is farms are now using this to reduce, as I mentioned, 50% cost for the wage because of labor cost. And then the consumption was, I think, 5% of what you would have originally done from the 100% of water consumption. So we're going to be, economically wise, I think it's going to become kind of a downturn due to the fact that the lower percentage, for example, we have the 98%, if you've ever heard of that, the 98% of the lower class, not containing the same amount of wealth as the 2% or 1%. So this would mean that they're making more money and while the other guys will not. So the laborers that go out of jobs will either A, have to switch their job and their skills, meaning that we'll have to reach to a different type of, different types of occupations, or we will have to get rid of the new farms because they're monopolizing all the money. So that would be where they might be taking. So that might be a possible explanation. So was it you? Yes.
Do you think this is going to be, this like technology will be like available to like every people, every place, or is this mostly like a Western technology?
Let's see. If you remember when I showed you that slide where like the farms in Nebraska were like continually changing, it took like about 100 years before all of the farms were using tractors, all of the farms were using cars and trucks. So I don't think it's entirely a Western idea, because I do understand that.
First world.
Oh, just first world?
Yeah, first world.
Oh, just first world, whether the first world will be completely access to it. Not second or third, just first.
I'm asking like, do you think second and third world countries will adopt this?
Oh, I see what you mean now. So, let's see. I do think I will consider the different types of like non-government funded associations that are working to try to bring new technology and knowledge into these third world and second world countries. However, I think that technology for the time being has been monopolized by the first world only. So if we were to bring in these new technology that would revolutionize the world, I think that it would eventually reach second and third worlds, but they would be years away, maybe 100 years past what we already have. So we'll already have new technology by the time that they get the old one. So I think that they will be advancing with us, but just at a slightly slower pace. But I think they will reach it. But again, this is just based on speculation. Yes?
So based on that, even the developed world has like basically the efficiency of these new technologies increases every year, every 2 years, something. But say if an individual farmer can't afford to adopt these technologies, do you think there's a risk for being outcompeted by all these big?
Oh yeah, big time.
As well as like traditional industries such as the automotive industry, since there's increased automation in that. Some countries are pushing for example, universal basic income or something of the sorts. If bigger industries buy up smaller farms and start mass producing food, for example, how do you think there should be a response to all the individuals who are losing their jobs?
So there's a lot of aspects in that question. So initially I'm gonna like look into the idea of just what would happen for farms. So as we know, as technology gets more powerful, it also becomes cheaper. So I did read in one article once that farms, even at smaller scales, will be able to compete with the big names and the big brands because they have the technology to do it. However, when you mention the idea of them buying the smaller farm, that's also a possibility. And this is not a brand new idea, right? This is happening with old, restaurants that you might know around the country, around the city, for that matter. So this is not a brand new idea. This obviously will happen, and it's not novel whether farms will have to be outcompeted by their predecessors and others like that. But I do understand that if you cannot buy the technology, there's a huge risk in you coming to bankruptcy. This has to do with the fact that the new technology is just far more efficient, brings far more yield. And if the technology such as logarithms and AI come across, you might be able to make better choices economically for your business. So smaller farms will be at a huge disadvantage, which is why I said there's ethical concerns when it comes to the production that is made and what will happen to food afterwards. Maybe it'd just be owned by one company or maybe not. There was one last thing you asked in the last question. What'd you say?
About supporting farmers or individuals who are
all right, the support. I don't know. I mean, like any business, you will have governments. Some countries will have governments helping the smaller businesses. In this case, will be the farmers. But if they cannot advance from where they are by getting new technology down to singularity, there's a possibility that they will just be left behind and they will not be able to meet the challenges that the new world brings. So I think that they've just completely wiped out. So I don't think that. This is why I mentioned that the old values will be wiped, because if you consider not changing the technology you're using or adding AI to to your farms or whatever, you would not be able to, well, what's the word I'm looking for? You would not be able to advance along with everyone else. So I think it has to do, it's a big player, right? It's a big player when it comes to you advancing with everyone else by buying their technology. So yeah, that's my answer to that.
Yeah.
Technological singularity is not only going to affect farming, but like multiple different occupational.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's just not, the question's not about switching, like if it's taken over farming, you switch your occupation to something else. Farmers are mostly self-employed people, right? They own their own farms, they work on that. Whereas people who own this technology are big businesses. And you repeatedly said that they will benefit economically. But when the public's buying power, they run out of business and their buying power is gone. Right, like forget about technology. Will we eat like a normal farmer? Will he be able to even afford food, for that matter?
Just like a normal, let's see, the producers, will they be able to afford their own food? That's what you're saying here, right?
Yeah.
So when, this is also mentioned in another article, and I did look into it. Basically what they argued was, because you said, right, that they're self-employed, there's also the possibility that they'll try to just maintain the wealth for themselves. But this has nothing to do with, this has to do with the occupation of being a farmer. What I'm trying to say here is, you said that they will change their skills, right? They're still farmers per se, but they're not your old farmer, right? They're not going to be like old Joe over here who's producing.
There will be no real occupation left for humans because everything will be.
Eventually, yes. That's why it was a huge, big. This was why it was important to me to look at farms, because we've looked at the idea of like big businesses. What would happen if like we automate machines to do, for example, cars, or we let them do our data? This would happen because it's a far more organic lifestyle, right? We see that farmers themselves are doing the work. They made it everything from themselves. They created the land. They bought the land, right? They sowed their seed and everything like that. But at the end of the day, if singularity does come and everyone else who are just completely just nobodies start using this technology and self-employed ways and call themselves farmers, they can completely outcompete the old values. So what I'm trying to say with that is, they will still be called farmers, but the occupation will no longer be the same. Not only for that, if they don't even change their skill shift, like they don't change what they know or what they do to something that fits the future, they can just be completely just ran out of their own business, right? You have the idea of CEOs just being, they're in charge of the company, right? They can also be fired by their higher ups. And if AI do surpass us, there's a possibility that they may become better than us in that regard as well. Even if you do own it, there's a possibility that you might just be run out of business because of the AI. Hi.
So with this increase in yield and decrease in cost,
Yes.
Obviously it's going to drive down prices of food just by pure supply and demand.
Yes.
But lately you see this surge of interest in like organic produce, organically, like non-GMO, non-pesticide, non-herbicide, products.
Right.
Do you think this lowered price of these GMO, these mass-produced vegetables will squash that organic industry, or do you think that will continue to thrive? And does an automated farm qualify for an organic product? Can you make that viable?
Like, will the automated farms be creating organic products per se? Is that what you're saying?
More or less, can you create organic products on an automated farm?
Oh, okay. Well, I see. When I was mentioning all the examples, I'm going to address that one first. When I was mentioning all the examples of genetic engineering, this is also another step towards singularity in terms of farming. So if we are trying to create higher yields with all the technology, affecting the species of like whatever crop we're talking about will be part of it. This doesn't necessarily have to happen, but it probably will happen. It's already happening right now. There's no chance that they're not going to stop, right? So when it comes to the organic part of the business, let me just give you a counter argument. When you're thinking of something like a big corporation like Coke, right? They can sell you 6 cans instead of like you trying to buy from this like no-name brand or whatever that there's a smaller company is trying to sell you the exact same thing but at a higher price. you would obviously go for Coke, right? Maybe you know them for quality, maybe you know them for price, maybe you know them because they're a big name. And I think that would have to really do with how the organic industry would play, right? Maybe a lot of people down the line change the way that they taste, right? For example, cybernetics out there could change us completely into just regular human beings, into cyborgs, and maybe we won't even be consuming the same food anymore, right? Which is another concern with farms. So if we're trying to talk about whether organic food will last, it all has to do with how human beings change and whether human beings still appreciate organic food. So whether they'll be run out of business has to do with how well they're doing. But if they run organic businesses using the technology, there's a possibility they might survive. But if the population, again, it's a very unstable market when it comes to business, right? You never know if your business is going to be better than the other one. We would not know if the farms in the organic industry could outweigh the values of the new industry, right? It's just a matter of what we value down the line, like 2045 and so onward. And lastly, you mentioned, can automations create like the organic product? It all has to do with whether we continue to genetically engineer or whether we change the way we look at it.
So we need to move on.
All right, no worries.